Okay, should be going. So while we let a few more folks in, I'm just going to start with my welcome. For those who don't know me, my name is Eileen Corcoran. I'm the Community Outreach Manager for the Vermont Historical Society. Super excited to have you here for what is actually technically our fourth virtual roundtable of 2021. And I think a great topic for us to be talking about today about reopening, quote unquote, our programs and museums. And to that end, I'm actually going to start us off with a poll. Any of you who were a judge at our Vermont History Day last week, we did a number of polls with the kids. So now I'm all poll tasting about Zoom. So
they started it with their cats, and so I'm countering with my dog. Oh, right, lip. Wow, what a kiss! Sorry. Okay.
I was gonna say the beauty of Zoom pets. So our first poll question is about what everybody's plans are so far. So what are your current plans for opening your museum or historical society or whatever other organization to the public? And again, I'd say choose the one that best fits what you're thinking about right now. There's, I think, a lot of question marks, which hopefully we'll talk through today. And I'll be interested to see sort of what people's plans are now, and maybe if we ask this question at the end of the roundtable, if any of us have any other thoughts. So we'll find out. So take a quick second, and once we get the majority of folks on there, I will share results. Most people voted, so I'm gonna share that. So it looks like we are kind of got the folks about open, and then some normal season folks and some undecided folks. So I think that's a great thing to go for right now. All right. And then I'm going to ask the second question. Oh, no, that's the same question again. Hang on. Okay, now we're going to ask the second question. I can do this polling. Okay, there we go. So this is a programming question. So hopefully we can talk a little about programming and places again. So what programming are you planning to host in 2021 or have hosted? This is multiple choice. You can choose any of the ones that you plan on doing. Any and all. Most everyone on this one. Everybody's. Okay, let's see where we're at. So small events, excellent. Virtual programs and hybrid programs, excellent. Couple fundraiser people. So that looks like that is going to be an interesting place to start as well. All right, thank you all for taking my polls. So we're going to start a little bit. I was actually asked Victoria Hughes, who is our museum and education manager, just to start us off with a little chat about what VHS and the Vermont History Museum specifically has been doing. We are open at the museum and have been open since last July. So Victoria, what kind of tidbits of fun do we want to talk about to start?
So I'll share some pictures. I think I got the power to do that right now. Just do it that way. And now got to do all the adjusting so I can see people. So we are open at the museum in Montpelier and have been open since last July. Although we're still down 1 day a week. We're open 4 days instead of our normal 5 days. And some of this is this is what we've been doing, but it's going to change soon because things keep changing. But one of the things that we wanted to be very clear with our messaging to people, even though we know that they're not reading all the signs on the front doors. I don't know if you have a million signs on your front doors if you're open, but we've got the state, you must do this sign and all kinds of details that nobody reads anymore. But we did want to be welcoming to people. We are not taking reservations, mainly because our capacity, even at the smallest point, was 75 people. And I don't know about your museums, but if we have 75 people at one time at the museum, it is a really good day. And we don't really ever have that many people at the museum at one time unless there's something special going on or a really large school group or something. So we didn't feel the need to take reservations. So we have been open to drop in people the entire time, since last July. One of the things that I have noticed is people, aren't reading the signs as much now as they did in the beginning. And even in the beginning, they didn't necessarily read the signs. So even though we have here like, welcome, please wash your hands, most people don't do that anymore. But it's also, balancing what seems to be the increased awareness now that COVID is not as transmissible by touching things as people were concerned about at the beginning. Still good to wash your hands, still good to be clean when you come into the museum. But I've noticed like even stores in town, they're not asking you to put on hand sanitizer the moment you walk in the door as much as they used to. So we haven't taken anything down yet. We haven't stopped any of our current precautions, but we are starting to talk about like what we can change up, including some things at our front desk. So we've got the plexi here, which is kind of hard to see in the photograph, but we've got the plexi. We have the contactless payment. We have the contact tracing information. We've got our clean pencils and our used pencils and our hand sanitizer. So there's a lot going on just when people make it to the front desk. We are going to stop contact tracing when we fall under universal guidance, which won't require it anymore, which is, I believe, is May 1st. In part because it's gotten really confusing with, I don't know if any of you are doing contact tracing currently, or if you've had to fill out forms at other places. The address part is pretty good. People have that down, but the whole question about, and they're pretty good about do you have COVID symptoms? And the answer should be no. But then it used to be, have you quarantined or have you traveled out of state? But now it's like, have you been vaccinated and it's been 14 days? Or if you've traveled, has it been 3 days and you've tested negative for COVID? And lots of, confusing questions that apply in different ways to different people. One thing though that is interesting with the contact tracing we've been doing, it's pretty clear that people are traveling now. Back in like February, people were traveling and their address was the lodge at Stowe, which is not a real address. So we suspect they were traveling. But now people, like yesterday, we had people from South Carolina and New York and all over. And I suspect that will be the case more and more, that, hopefully people are vaccinated or making good choices or testing negative when they should be tested. According to now, it's the 3-day rule, but we are definitely seeing more and more people traveling. will stop asking them about that. A few things we've done, and I think we'll have time for discussion and questions after this, but a few things we've done that have been pretty successful are the clean items and the used items, because our museum, we usually see a lot of school groups and a lot of children, and we wanted to keep some of the hands-on things that we have in the exhibit. And in all honesty, a lot of people, not children, play with the toys too. But this one has been pretty easy. We have the basket, you take the clean ones, you play with it, you put it in the used ones, and we come through with Lysol wipes and wipe things down on occasion. And people have been really good about following directions on things like this, because it is pretty simple messaging. We have closed some things, like this is the one where you're supposed to stick your nose into the box and smell things. So this is closed. This will stay closed. I think even as we open up more, we are going to not encourage people to sniff things. Because one thing, and I assume we'll talk about this later, is the whole what's going to happen with masks, because we have required masks since we opened, in part because Montpelier came out with a mask mandate before the governor did, and so since we've been open, masks have been required. What happens afterwards, and because presumably at some point it will no longer be a state mandate. Do we continue to mandate it? But either way, it doesn't seem good to encourage people to stick their noses in the same place as other people. Whole other question of whether we should have been doing this all along or not, but we'll worry about non-COVID hygiene issues another day. This is one of our rooms where we have a lot of changes, where you can see the hand sanitizer, you can see the clean and used bin for our witch fingers, which are the way if you want to tap the telegraph without using your actual finger, and trying to have some fun with our adaptations. We have the clean pencils and the used pencils for writing a letter. We have a magnet board so you don't have to touch anybody else's letter. These magnet boards are going to come down, and we're going to go back to using the mail slots like we had before. We've talked about not being as worried about people sharing pencils anymore, although this is a pretty easy adaptation to have around. And I think, hand sanitizer is easy to get now, so we can continue to have the hand sanitizer out and about. One thing I don't think we're going to put back in anytime soon are the dress-up clothes, in part until children can be vaccinated, or it's clear that spread is very minimal. I don't feel comfortable putting out the dress-up clothes again, but this is our adaptation for the dress-up clothes, which are dress-up mirrors, where you can look at yourself in a mirror and pretend that you have on fancy shoes or a fancy hat. Because part of this is, we still want to have fun, and we still want to make the museum seem like an interactive, fun place. So you can't try on real clothes, but you can try on pretend clothes. And this is, again, sort of our having fun with this is, there's signs everywhere. So keep a catamount apart, or, there have been the signs, keep a cow apart, or, if there's something in your museum that, can be fun with the signage. People do seem to appreciate and notice, maybe they're not always good about following it, but notice, we're doing our part with the messaging. And that's sort of the end of the pictures of the museum piece of it. And some of these may change as we go further into the summer. but it will be taking, what we're talking about now is adding back a few more of the interactive pieces and maybe taking out some of the precautions. One of the things that people aren't using anymore is we have a stylus clean and used to do some tablets, that we have some tablets in the museum, and people just aren't using the styli at this point. They're just touching the tablet because I feel like visitors aren't seeing that as a potential danger. Therefore, they're not using the adaptations that we have set up. So those things might come out. So those are sort of the museum adaptations, and we do have some programming things, but maybe we'll talk about those later. I didn't really talk with Eileen about a plan of action here, but I think this is sort of what we've done in the physical space of welcoming visitors back to the museum.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, so many various things of different points in time. But I think maybe we can start off the discussion with John's question about modifications relative to the gift shop. So I'll say we basically did not make much of anything for the gift shop. So I'd be love to hear, have other people made changes? Again, presuming you've been open to things like gift shops or other sorts of retail-ish spaces.
Well, I will say that we partly borrowed the adaptation of the clean bin and the used bin from I was on some webinar and people were talking about that's what they were doing for their shop was, oh, somebody picks up this book and looks at it. Because really, if you were to buy a book at a shop, you want to read what it says on the back. And then they put it into the used bin. We don't have that many people touching things in the store that it felt like that was a necessary thing to keep people safe. So mainly the contactless payment is our adaptation, but we accept cash if people want to give us cash.
Anyone else?
We set just, a limit on, as we did in every space in the museum, on the number of people that can be in the space at the same time. And again, attendance has been low enough that our shop manager has kind of just done spot cleaning after someone has visited the shop. I'm sorry. Marie wants to get his 2 cents in. And we did go only cash only, and are still abiding by that policy.
I'm guessing you probably all did this, but because for cash registers and credit card machines, we got the specially fitted, plastic covers that go over the keyboard so you can easily wipe them down without damaging your electronics. We have our shops are manned by seasonal people, and so they change over, it's not always the same person at the register. So even things that might normally be just one person in a normal store can be touched by many people. So, all our keyboard got covers and everything, and it makes it much easier to clean, so.
One question I have sort of based on this question, like, does it feel like, are there concerns about the shop in, in ways that are different than the museum spaces in general, in terms of risk or exposure?
I think for us, it's just that things in the shop get handled more than objects in the museum. We did remove almost all of our hands-on elements, including paper handouts, but we are now bringing back paper handouts. And I think, Victoria, it was kind of nice to hear that your observation is that visitors are less concerned about the touch risk as well. Because I know in the beginning it was like, yeah, we know what the science says, but it doesn't matter what the science says. What matters is what visitors think. And so we were really, hyper cautious about touch, even though the evidence was minimal. So if public perception is moving away from that concern as well, that's a good thing, because that eases up a lot of the precautions that we've felt necessary to take.
It was interesting. I was in a bank the other day and I walked in and just immediately looked for the hand sanitizer, since every retail shop I go into has it right there, and there was no hand sanitizer. And I actually kind of wanted some, because I just, I don't know, and there was one bottle of hand sanitizer on the, where the tellers sit, that was accessible to the public, and it was broken. So I was like, okay, I think maybe you're letting down your guard just a little too much, because I feel like, again, I think we're moving to, at least by the state guidance, we're moving to, expecting some level of self, policing is not the right word, but, people taking some responsibility. But I feel like we definitely still want to provide them, access to hand sanitizer, because people's level of comfort may be different, and, giving them the power to make sure that they're staying safe. And if they've touched something they're not comfortable about, they can go clean their hands easily. I think it's really important. So.
Our hand sanitizer is one of the places we had a lot of fun with signage. We took images, portraits from our galleries, and made little quotes about them. Like one was just sort of refined looking gentleman saying, "I don't always visit the museum, but when I do, I use hand sanitizer." So we had little posters like that next to all of our hand sanitizer dispensers.
I think we have an automatic hand sanitizer pump at the front desk now, and I screwed it to the wall, so I think it'll stay on the wall. And probably that's one of the things that will just stay on the wall forever now. But it is funny to see how when some people come to the front desk, they use the hand sanitizer, but other people, when they start to fill out the contact tracing, don't even look to see that the green cup is good and the red cup is used, and they just grab a pencil without even looking. So I think it is a lot on comfort level that people have personally for them, and some people are more comfortable than others. So that idea of keeping some things available, but maybe not expecting everybody to pay attention as much as they had in the past.
Also, I saw the signage as much as a way to provide support to the staff, because some of these rules were hard and fast rules, and so if any, we were worried that there might be some pushback from visitors. So it's helpful to have things written down that people can say, well, you might have noticed that we have signage, that kind of thing. It didn't turn out to be a big problem. People follow, there wasn't a good deal, it wasn't much challenging, but it just sort of reinforces and gives your staff some backup.
So Tracy, since you've been talking, can you say just a little bit, what is the plan for state historic sites for this season at this point?
We haven't changed all that much in our plans for operating this season from what we did last season. I don't know if you know, but we have 9 sites that are generally open to the public, all different sizes and levels of complexity. So last year, we didn't open any of the sites until July. I think we opened the same day that Vermont Historical Society opened. But as they did, we cut back on days of operation. So our sites that usually were open 7 days a week were only open 6 days a week, and some of the others were cut back. 3 of the smallest sites were not opened at all, and that had to do with the need to to use seasonal staff positions that might have been out in these outlying sites to double up in other places to help with traffic control and providing guidance. And we were required to have a safety officer, an official safety officer at every location. So we pulled some of the positions from some of the smaller sites and put them in some of the larger sites. And we're actually planning to do the same thing this year, except the 3 largest sites, which are the President Coolidge site, Bennington Battle Monument, and Mount Independence, are all going to go back to more of a normal opening time. So they're going to open on Memorial Day weekend, which was when most of our sites used to open. And the 3 mid-sized sites, Chimney Point, Hubbardton, and Justin Morrow, will open the first weekend of July. And the 3 smallest sites, again, are slated not to open this year. A lot of that, again, has to do with staffing and yeah, mostly staffing. But and again, our schedules are still not back to normal. So we have fewer days that we're open, but not, not dramatically different.
Tracy, do you know if the Battle Monument will be able to open its elevator again this year?
We just were talking about that about an hour ago. It won't be open when we start. I don't know how many of you have been up in the monument, but it's not like an elevator that you step into by yourself and press the button. There's actually an elevator operator in there, and that's the complexity, because we just found out that people can use elevators if it's like a family group going in together. But of course, there's always going to be an elevator operator in there who's not part of that family group. So because our elevator is also very tiny, those of you may remember, you can't really get 6 feet apart in there. So at opening, it's not going to be open initially, but we do have some hope that maybe later in the season, come August or something, we may be able to, but it's not, and as a result, that site's only going to be 4 days a week at the beginning of the season, but hopefully we do have exhibits on, so people are allowed to go into the monument with traffic control and one-way traffic and that kind of thing.
So I think I want to start to ask, so we had about a good, not quite half of folks who were unsure about their plans for this sort of year season. So I guess for some of you especially, like what are still the questions, or what are the issues or clarifications or roadblocks? I think Tracy obviously talked about staff or people being one. I think that's one for a lot of places, but for those of you who are unsure, what are you unsure about?
Hi, I'm John from the Brandon Museum, and one of our concerns is all of our workers are volunteers, and mostly older and retired people, and we haven't really done an outreach to them yet, but just wondering what people are doing that are volunteer based, what kind of response are they getting from volunteers as far as participation this year and reluctance to participate and that sort of thing.
I will say we have volunteers who help staff our front desk at the museum, and some of them have returned and are perfectly comfortable, in part because our visitation is pretty low, and some of them haven't returned yet. And it somewhat depends on their situations, although some of the ones who have returned really like getting out of the house. And I think that's one of the reasons that they came back to volunteer as early as last July, is that they were tired of being at home, and what the adaptations we had made felt comfortable enough to them that they were willing to come back. Can I jump in with a concern that I have going forward? And I don't know that we can know this yet, but what happens when there's not a mask mandate? And is that something that we can mandate? Do some people feel more comfortable because it exists even as more people get vaccinated? Do some people feel less comfortable? Like visitors feel more comfortable visiting without masks, but the people who work at the front desk feel less comfortable that strangers are coming in not wearing masks. And I think that part of this is that reentry question of how do we do this? And how do we go back into what used to seem perfectly normal? And how are we going to enforce that? Because that was a concern we had with the reopening, was the enforcement of masks, but it never really was an issue because of the mask mandate.
This is John at the Ethan Allen Homestead. One of the modifications that we put into place last year was tours are done by appointment, where we used to just simply have people come in at any time between 10 and 4. The appointments have really worked well because it's allowed us to be a little more efficient in doing our tours where we know who is coming. So I think in terms of masks, if we had a volunteer guide who felt that they felt uncomfortable without a mask, we could publicize that ahead of time, that on this tour, masks will be required. But I think I think we'll see a lot of changes in the next month or two as things open up and people get more comfortable. But doing the tours by appointment has really made our use of our volunteers a lot more productive, because if we know that there's nobody coming in between 10 and 12, we don't necessarily have to have a guide sitting around waiting for something to happen. And also the old way, you might start a tour at 10:30 and then you had people walking in at 11:15. So therefore you'd send them, they would maybe join the tour in progress and you had to kind of make sure to cover everything for them also. So doing the tours by appointment has been a change that has been very effective, I think, for the way we do things.
We've decided, because the new guidance, even when we get to sort of the most open phase of it, I work for state government, you'd think I would remember the names of them, but anyway, that last, most open phase, still
step 3. It's called step 3, Tracy.
Step 3, thank you. I don't know if it was phase 3 or step C or, but at the bottom, it still says, we recommended, mask wearing, social distancing. And so we just decided we're just sticking with what's recommended, whether it's hard and fast rule or not, because it gets to, in the interest of fairness and clarity, we want everybody to have to play by the same rules. I do think one thing that might happen to us this year as the season goes on, also, we only have to plan to the middle of October and then we're done for the year. So, we don't have to worry about if it's going to be different later in the year. But last year we had a small number of masks at every site available to give to people who just forgot. And a lot of people did. And we didn't have anybody really push back about the mask, but we did have a few people that said, oh gosh, I don't have one. And we would give them one. I suspect we may need to have more on hand this year, because I expect a lot more people to come without them. And if they, and we're talking about indoor spaces. Our sites also have a lot of outdoor spaces, which is a whole other issue. But if they're coming inside of a building, we're going to have them wear masks. Again, knowing that we only go to the end of October. So.
I have kind of a related concern to Victoria's about masks, and that is that the Vermont Forward Plan, talking about indoor events, identifies, in step 2, you can have 1 unvaccinated person per 100 square foot. And then that moves in step 3 to 1 unvaccinated person per 50 square feet. And I'm wondering, how the heck are we asking everybody to tell us what their vaccination status is? Are we allowed to do that? What if that seems exceedingly awkward to me. But I haven't heard any of the press conferences, and I don't know if it has been explained by someone from the governor's office or who's involved in the plan. Any thoughts from this group?
I will say, I don't know if anyone else went, but I went to the ACCD webinar yesterday on it, and there was a slide with a lot of math on it that was very confusing. So I think their big point that I got out of it, beyond the math that we all have to apparently do, is that they are being very, leaving it up to the place to figure out how they're figuring it out. So come up with your way of asking or not asking people if they're vaccinated. Come up with your way of saying, are we asking or are we not asking? And that sort of thing. So I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts or any ideas for what they're either. And we've talked a little bit programming wise. Are we going to quote unquote require vaccinations for certain programs or ask for certain programs? Again, capacity wise, we're probably not talking about doing big events at this point in time inside, but I think that is a question for us. So I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on what they're going to do yet for that.
Our thoughts right now are that for in-house programs, lectures and whatnot, we will try to find some way, whatever is deemed legal, because I'm sure there'll be court challenges to everything. But we will require some proof of vaccination for in-house programs like lectures. But we'll also have the virtual component. If you're not vaccinated, you can watch it from home, Facebook Live or YouTube, whatever. So we're not denying people access to the content, but we are denying them access to the building for the in-person event. How we're going to check for vaccination proof, that still waits to be seen. Will it be laminated vaccination cards, or if something else pops up that people use? Don't know yet.
I just have to say, I wish they made those vaccination cards wallet size. They don't fit in your wallet.
But they do fit in name badge holders. So if you have an old name badge holder from some conference you've attended, they do fit in those.
Maybe we're all expected to pin them to our shirts and, yeah, on our foreheads.
At this point, we're just planning to assume unvaccinated and stick with the spacing. It does decrease as Rachel, as the steps move from 1 to 2 to 3, the space, indoor space does get smaller. So I just feel uncomfortable. As again, a lot of our staff who are encountering people at the front door are seasonal people. I don't want them to be in that position or to feel awkward or to set up possible confrontation. So we just decided we're just assuming unvaccinated and going along with the steps, allowing, based on how much space you need for each person inside.
One thing that I'm thinking about, because I work with school programs, and we have been doing in-person homeschool programs since last September. We have had 2 school groups at the museum this year, both very small, and we have 2 camp groups on the schedule for this summer. But thinking more, because children at this point can't be vaccinated, but really thinking of, we've been following the school guidance for school programs and the homeschool programs, instead of sort of adult thinking, if that's the guidance we need to follow, we're going to follow the school guidance over the sort of the more general. And I think, if we're thinking, and I'm not really thinking about specific, school or children programs for this summer, but thinking about what the spacing requirements or the temperature check-in requirements are, looking at the school guidance for those, instead of sort of the universal guidance is universal, but in a lot of ways it seems related to adults.
I just, speaking of school groups, I'm Miriam from the Heritage Winooski Mill Museum. I've actually been hosting a few groups from UVM, and I have a class of 18 students coming next week. But what I've done with them is they split up into 3 groups, and they rotate doing different activities. So 2 of the groups will be outside at different locations, and then they come in for like a half an hour, 40 minutes into the museum, and then rotate. And I actually, this past month, there was one class that was 120 students. Oh my God. And they're split up into labs. So it was over 4 days rotating all these students through. Everyone wore a mask. Of course, all the students, they get tested twice a week. So I asked them to fill out a form confirming that they were following the UVM protocols, and that I had some contact information, so we knew which students had been in each group. And you know, I was a little nervous because there's been a lot of things happening at UVM, but it all worked out really well. So we haven't had any high school or elementary school students come, and I think that's more so because a lot of those schools are not doing trips at all. But I wonder, you know, unless younger students get vaccinated, how that will come in the fall, because, you know, unless, depending on the age range, how that we will be able to manage that. But I'm curious if other people have been doing that as well.
I think one concern with that is the busing, that there's still the distancing on the buses. And so the schools can't load 60 kids into a school bus and get them somewhere. And one concern that I have for us here at the museum is that the State House is still closed. And I think they're debating on what to do, but it sounds like, you know, they might open for the fall, but whether they're going to welcome large groups of students back at anytime soon. And usually the schools come here and go there. So I think it'll remain to be seen what schools look like for next year, and what school groups can look like, just out of, maybe not out of the necessarily COVID precautions, but just out of the logistical getting back into school programs.
I sent this comment through chat because I wanted to make sure I got the language correctly because it's complicated. But because the vaccine, from the research that I've seen and from the news, you can still transmit COVID, but you're less likely to get sick once you have it. So requiring people to be vaccinated is really only protecting them from themselves rather than helping us control community spread. So that's where I'm thinking it may not make that much sense for us to keep an eye on it.
I'm thinking about in the cases where we can provide a virtual option as well, including language, something like, you know, if you have not been vaccinated, we highly recommend that you participate virtually, or something like that. You know, I don't know how the heck we could monitor, and your point, Alice, is right on. You know, someone being vaccinated doesn't necessarily prevent them from spreading it to someone else. So the real concern is people who aren't vaccinated being exposed.
I think as attractions, our responsibility is more about controlling the spread rather than about protecting people from themselves. I hope that's not political. I think not.
Well, and I think it does, you know, I mean, and again, this gets back to, I think, a little bit of the unknown aspect of what we're all still dealing with, especially with vaccinations and spread. And I think the idea, hope, is that all the vaccinations help stop the spread. That's got to be. But I think, again, it comes back to this question of July 4th, when things are not mandated for like something like masks, which appear to be one of the main things helping to stop spread alongside distancing and stuff, are only encouraged instead of required. Right, what are we, you know, again, how do we sort of respond to that, and what that looks like? And I think that's the thing of, we don't know with the vaccines yet what 6 months looks like post vaccine, and what it does or doesn't do. It's hard to still deal with those unknowns a year and a half later for all of us, I think.
Yeah, and there are a lot of unknowns. With requiring vaccination cards or proof of vaccination, I think that we should also continue to require mask wearing as well. I mean, it's not like everyone just stops wearing masks at July 4th. And there are a lot of unknowns. I mean, there is no vaccine approved by the CDC to prevent COVID. Every vaccine that's being used is under emergency conditional use. So, you know, we really don't know anything about the current or future efficacy of these vaccines. But since it does seem that the vaccines do help in many ways, and masks help in many ways, if we want to reopen and want to make our services available again, that we should require certain things like vaccination, like mask. And if people are not vaccinated, they don't come in. Our place is so small that the one person per 100 square feet or whatever it is, I mean, that doesn't work for us. You know, that we can't get anyone in the door that way, you know, so that's why we're thinking about going with the stricter things, even though we don't know anything, really.
One thing that I'm worried about, but still like don't know yet, is how we balance the increased amount of digital things that we're producing or virtual programs, which I think there are some things that a lot of the virtual might be here to stay in some ways, because we do know how to Zoom now and people are comfortable accessing programs at home, but balance that with the desire or the interest of people to come to things in person. And so, you know, do we run every program in person and digital, or just in person? But as we add more things back, how do we balance all of that? And how do we, you know, do we keep doing, I've been doing homeschool programs in person, virtual, and as an at-home lesson plan version. I can't do that again next year if we have school groups here. Because, and I anticipate at least having some school groups back in person. So I think it'll be interesting to see how we deal with capacity issues now that we've shown that we can do the virtual thing, but do we keep doing it all the time?
I've already had to push back on that, Victoria. I happened to see a document. I was part of a committee working on a document, and unbeknownst to me, someone else on the committee who is not involved in programs added some language about, you know, we've done all of these virtual things, which we plan to continue and expand. And I had to push back and say, not unless you are also planning to hire more staff, because it's a lot of work, and we're going back to in-person, and that was my full-time job before the pandemic. So I think we have to be on the watch for that, and stand up. Those of us who are in programming, stand up for ourselves, and make sure that people understand that it's a lot of work to do what we've been doing for the last year, and that it's not sustainable while also doing everything we were doing before when that comes back. That said, I do plan to keep some things. I initiated a new virtual program this year, not 100% as a result of the pandemic, but certainly connected to it. And I plan to keep that program fully virtual forever. And other things to do both in person, and it's easy enough to also record them, or just have have them happening on Zoom as well. So some things will be a hybrid, and then there's plenty of other things that I'm planning will be only available in person.
I have a funny thing to share. The historic sites, Chimney Point, Mount Independence, and Hubbardton, what we call the Western sites, are involved in a grant funded teacher education program this year. It was supposed to happen last year. It's funded through the National Endowment for the Humanities. But the Vermont Archaeology Society really was the lead institution on this grant. And it was supposed to bring teachers to Vermont to teach them about place-based education. So we put it off last year, but this year, the other partners involved were like, let's just do it. And we have no staff. I mean, we have no staff. We have no technical help. We rely on other partners in state government, especially in our own agency, to help us with anything technological. And they were out straight, as you can imagine, with all the COVID funds coming through. I mean, nobody had any time for us, and understandably. But so in the end, we got pulled into this completely virtual teacher training thing about place-based education. I'm like, if we succeed in this, aren't we undermining our own point that it's important to be where the history happened for certain kinds? But anyway, it's just a little comical. Fortunately, our partners are helping us with the technology piece of it, so it's all going to work out. But I just think it's just funny. I don't want to have to do technology after this if I don't have to. Unless we have, as you say, a staff person who can help us, who actually knows with that.
Are there any predictions that people have? Do you think we'll see lots and lots of people this summer, or not as many? Or, I mean, because that's something we're not going to change our capacity, but we don't really know yet what it's going to look like, whether there's a lot of pent up demand or if people are still going to be cautious.
I think so. Until May 1st, we're open by appointment, and we've been seeing kind of a rising trend of appointments, at least one a day. That's for our off season. That's pretty impressive. So I think it's going to be a busy season.
I think so too. I actually have several, not a lot, but a handful of bus tours on the schedule. And I've been communicating with them, keeping them kind of up to date on what the restrictions are. And I just heard from one of them that their tour is already half full. This is for an October tour. And they're anticipating a big, people being really eager to get back to traveling. And I think that's kind of the mood in Bennington right now, is businesses feel like it's going to be a busy summer and fall, barring any, major reversal in the trends. What I find so ironic is that Vermont is really at its pandemic peak right now. We've been so fortunate to have such low numbers throughout, but it just feels very ironic that we're kind of at our height at the same time that all of the restrictions are being loosened. I don't know how anyone else feels about that. It has me feeling very like, I don't know, manic depressive, I guess.
It's like we're going in two directions at once. People are getting vaccinated, people are getting sick. And that does seem very odd. And so it's kind of like a race between, do we all get sick or do we all get vaccinated first? But as far as traveling this summer, I'm expecting a busy summer. I know I can't wait to get out on the road for a few day trips, just to get a different scenery, you know. And I'm assuming that other people will do that too. But also from what I've talked to other people about is that there seems to be a thought that it'll be staggered. There'll be some people who want to get out and will get out right away. And then there are others who will be a lot more cautious and might not even come out until the fall. And so that's a good thing because that'll stagger visitations instead of everyone coming on the first day we're open, you know, coming over a few months. But again, we'll see.
I have some fall winter concerns, you know, if we have to have boosters. You know, I was listening to a talk by Nicholas Christakis, who wrote Apollo's Arrow, and he, you know, his prediction was summer's going to be a great summer, but we should watch for fall winter. And so, you know, my winter programs went really, really, really well on Zoom. And I think people enjoyed sort of being by their fireplace and not going out on the icy roads to a program. And so I'm thinking I might repeat my winter programs on Zoom.
I'm a little bit worried just because the tourism folks seem very optimistic. And of course, we want to have people back. It's sad when there aren't people at our sites, but I'm a little nervous about, you know, would we get overwhelmed beyond what we feel like we can safely control, especially come fall with foliage and everything. Just don't know. I mean, I want them back, but also I want to be able to manage it safely. So I have some anxiety about that time of year.
So we are at our 1 o'clock and we've got a couple folks that have to go. Any burning questions or comments anyone else wants to share or make or ask about before we all go back to our anxiety by ourselves?
I just thought this was really wonderful, Eileen. I'd love to have another similar conversation when we get a little further along in the season.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this.
Yeah, maybe something like
great.
when we get to that July 4th date and everybody doesn't have to wear masks again, we can check in and see how we're all doing. Because I think we're still, yeah, I think those question marks are still there for a lot of things. So. Right. Well, thank you all for coming and sharing everything. We have one more virtual program on the 29th coming up with Sarah Rooker on podcast driving tours and comic books. So that's going to be super awesome. Looking forward to that one. And hopefully someday we will see you all in person again as well. Thanks, everyone. And again, if you have any questions, contact us, Victoria and I, or anyone else at VHS. We're always happy to go through what's going on together. Thanks, everyone.